In the late 1920s, money felt permanent. It was something you trusted without thinking, something that worked because it always had. Banks stood tall in city centers like monuments to certainty. Factory whistles marked the rhythm of daily life. Wages arrived on time. Prices made sense. Savings accounts grew quietly, reassuringly. Money wasn't just a tool, it was a promise. And then, slowly at first, and then all at once, that promise broke. The Great Depression was not merely an economic downturn, it was a collapse of belief. A moment when people discovered that money, stripped of trust, was nothing more than paper and numbers agreed upon by a system that could fail. This is the story of that moment, when money lost meaning and society was forced to confront what really holds the world together. The story America told itself. Before the collapse, America lived inside a story of inevitability. The 1920s were framed as proof that the future had arrived. Industrial production surged. Consumer goods flooded the market. Radios carried voices across the nation. Cars reshaped cities and countryside alike. Skyscrapers rose as physical declarations of confidence. The stock market became the ultimate symbol of progress. It didn't just reward investment, it seemed to reward faith. Ordinary people watched prices rise and concluded that prosperity was no longer reserved for the elite. Banks reinforced the narrative. Credit was easy. Borrowing felt safe. Even risk was rebranded as opportunity. Buying stocks on margin with borrowed money became common practice. Money appeared self-generating. Growth felt natural. Collapse felt impossible. What few recognized was that the system depended entirely on confidence. And confidence is fragile. The crash that shattered certainty. When the stock market fell in October 1929, it did more than destroy portfolios. It shattered assumptions. Prices collapsed so quickly that people couldn't process what was happening. Fortunes that took decades to build disappeared in days. Ticker tape machines printed losses faster than they could be read. But the market crash alone did not cause the Great Depression. The real damage came afterward. When fear replaced optimism, investors stopped investing. Banks stopped lending, businesses stopped expanding, consumers stopped spending. Every decision became cautious, then frozen. Money did not vanish overnight, it stopped moving. And when money stopped circulating, economies slowly suffocate. When banks became places of fear, banks were meant to embody stability. Instead, they became epicenters of panic. As rumors of insolvency spread, people rushed to withdraw their savings. Lines formed outside bank doors before sunrise. Inside, employees faced impossible choices, knowing reserves were limited. There was no deposit insurance, no federal guarantee. If a bank failed, depositors lost everything. When banks closed, savings evaporated. For millions, money did not decline in value. It ceased to exist. Years of discipline, sacrifice, and planning vanished without ceremony. Trust, once broken, did not return easily, and without trust, money lost its authority. Unemployment and the collapse of identity. Jobs disappeared faster than explanations. Factories shut down as demand collapsed. Construction projects halted. Railroads cut staff. Businesses failed in waves, each closure triggering another. By the early 1930s, unemployment reached unprecedented levels. Millions wanted work. Millions could not find it. Men who had defined themselves through labor stood idle. Skills meant nothing without opportunity. Effort could not overcome structural failure. For the first time on a mass scale, people learned that work does not guarantee survival when systems break. Money, once earned through effort, became inaccessible not because people stopped working, but because the economy stopped recognizing work as valuable. Breadlines and the return of survival economics. As wages disappeared, daily life transformed. Breadlines stretched through city streets, soup kitchens became lifelines. Churches and charities filled gaps left by collapsing institutions. Pride gave way to necessity. People adapted. Clothes were patched and repatched. Meals were stretched thin. Nothing was wasted. Objects gained second and third lives. Families learned to survive on ingenuity rather than income. Barter returned. Haircuts were traded for meals, repairs for vegetables, labor for shelter. Value became personal and immediate, measured not in currency but in usefulness. Money still existed, but it no longer dictated survival. Community did. Farmers and the absurdity of worthless abundance. For farmers, the Depression arrived with brutal clarity. Crop prices collapsed so completely that harvesting food sometimes cost more than selling it. Milk was dumped into ditches. Crops were destroyed, livestock slaughtered. This was not because food was unwanted, people were starving, but the market could not function without prices. And without functioning markets, abundance became worthless. This was one of the cruelest paradoxes of the Great Depression. Value existed, but money could no longer express it. Food had meaning, money did not. The Dust Bowl. When the land gave up, economic collapse was soon followed by environmental catastrophe. Years of over-farming and poor land management met severe drought across the Great Plains. Topsoil turned to dust. Winds carried it across states, blotting out the sun. Farms failed entirely. Homes were buried. Families packed what little they had and fled west, searching for work that rarely existed. The Dust Bowl revealed how interconnected failure truly was. Economic pressure encouraged reckless farming. Environmental collapse deepened poverty. Migration strained already fragile communities. Money could not stop the wind. And without land or income, it could not restart lives either. The psychological wound no one spoke about. The most devastating impact of the Great Depression was not hunger or homelessness. It was shame. Men who had provided for families could no longer do so. Women rationed resources until there was nothing left to stretch. Children watched parents lose confidence, dignity, and certainty. Money had been tied to identity. When it disappeared, so did self-worth. People questioned everything they had been taught. If saving didn't protect them, what was the point? If work didn't secure survival, what did effort mean? If the system failed, where did responsibility lie? The Depression stripped away illusions and left a silence filled with doubt. A system forced to change. Eventually, collapse demanded response, not just economic, but moral and structural. Under Franklin D. Roosevelt, the federal government stepped into a role it had never fully occupied before. Until that moment, American life had been shaped by the belief that survival was primarily an individual responsibility. If you failed, it was assumed you hadn't worked hard enough, saved wisely enough, or prepared properly. The Great Depression shattered that assumption. It revealed that even disciplined, hard-working people could be crushed by forces far beyond their control. Roosevelt reframed the crisis as systemic, not personal. If the system had failed, then the solution could not rely on individual endurance alone. Government intervention became not an intrusion, but a necessity. Banks were stabilized to stop panic and restore confidence. Regulations were introduced to prevent reckless speculation. Jobs were created through massive public works programs, not as charity, but as dignity-preserving employment. Roads, bridges, dams, schools, and public buildings rose across the country, reshaping both the physical landscape and the national psyche. These projects were not only about infrastructure, they were about purpose. They gave people a reason to wake up, a place to go, and a role in rebuilding the nation. The New Deal did not end suffering overnight. Poverty persisted. Unemployment remained high. Fear did not vanish. But something fundamental changed. For the first time, many citizens believed the government bore responsibility for economic stability and collective survival. That belief, more than currency, more than policy, rebuilt trust. And as trust slowly returned, money began to regain meaning once again. The long shadow of scarcity. Even as recovery began, the psychological damage endured. Those who lived through the Depression never forgot it. They saved obsessively, feared debt, distrusted speculation, hoarded resources quietly. Waste became unthinkable. Their habits shaped generations. Frugality turned into virtue. Stability became sacred. Prosperity, when it returned, was met with caution rather than celebration. Money was no longer abstract. It was survival compressed into currency. Once you lived through a time when money fails, you never fully trust it again. War and the machinery of recovery. Ironically, it took global conflict to fully revive the economy. World War II mobilized industry on a scale the Depression never could. Factories reopened, jobs flooded back, production surged, wages flowed, money regained function because it was once again tied to collective purpose and guaranteed demand. But the cost was immense. The Depression did not end because it healed. It ended because the world redirected resources toward survival through war. The economic machine restarted, but the lesson remained etched into memory. What the Great Depression truly revealed. The Great Depression was not merely about poverty, it was about trust. It exposed money as a shared belief system rather than a fixed truth. Currency works only when people believe institutions will honor it, protect it, and circulate it fairly. When belief collapses, money becomes meaningless. Food matters, shelter matters, cooperation matters, community matters. Money alone cannot guarantee any of them. That realization permanently reshaped how societies think about economics, governance, and responsibility. Why the lesson still matters. Every financial crisis since has carried echoes of the Great Depression. The details change, the technology evolves, but the patterns remain familiar. Markets surge and then collapse. Banks overextend and suddenly fail. Jobs disappear faster than explanations can be given, and beneath it all lies the same quiet fear that the systems people rely on may not be as stable as they appear. What separates modern crises from the 1930s is not immunity, but memory. Safeguards now exist because of what was learned through collapse. Deposit insurance was created so that ordinary people would never again lose everything overnight. Financial regulations were introduced to limit reckless speculation. Social safety nets were built to prevent economic hardship from instantly becoming human catastrophe. None of these protections were inevitable. They were not gifts. They were concessions carved out of suffering, shaped by lives disrupted and livelihoods destroyed. The Great Depression endures not just as a historical event, but as a permanent warning. It reminds us that optimism without protection is dangerous, that unchecked growth invites instability, and that trust, once broken, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it remembers. The Great Depression forced humanity to confront an uncomfortable truth. Money is powerful, but only while belief holds. When belief breaks, paper loses authority. Numbers lose meaning. Survival returns to fundamentals: food, shelter, cooperation, and trust. The world recovered, systems adapted, money regained value, but the memory never faded, because once you've lived through a time when money lost meaning, you never look at it the same way again. And perhaps that awareness, fragile, humbling, and deeply human, is the most valuable lesson the Great Depression left behind.